Hello, welcome to another Adventure Forge class. This one is focused on production and project management, and I am overjoyed to have one of the best producers I've ever worked with in a very long career, and that's Evan Brandt, who we had the joy of working with each other at Project Archer. And Evan has had a long and storied career in production. I'll let you do a quick review of that, and then we'll dive right into what advice we can share.
Yeah, so I started in the video game industry in the early 90s, Origin Systems working on MS-DOS games, and worked in quality assurance for years and years, and then finally joined production in Xbox Live at Microsoft. Done that for about 20 years and worked on games and services and software that support other entertainment and learned a lot along the way.
And currently, where are you at?
Right now, I'm working as a senior producer at Epic Games.
Yeah, worth mentioning because, a couple people heard of that.
Yep.
Well, awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us and talk on the subject. And in kind of our prep for this, I think one of the things that you raised, which is absolutely like the most important subject probably, is scope and intention. Who are you making this for? And are you thinking about it in the appropriate way? So why don't you pick up on that?
Sure. One of the first things, whenever I approach a project, I want to know a handful of things. Have I identified my customer? Do I know what the thing is I'm trying to solve for or trying to deliver to said customer? And if I know what that is, then I'm like, okay, well, now how do I enumerate that and make sure that I vet that with anyone that I'm working with, any partners, anybody that I'm delivering things to? If I'm building it, of course, myself, then I am the customer. But I still want to enumerate all of those to make sure that you have an artifact that you can use to rally people around. So as you bring new people onto the team, or if decisions are made during the process, you can always refer back to this. And it might be that there are decisions down the road that you make that actually change that first artifact that you make. Your journey might actually take a path, just like any other narrative piece, which is okay, but you still want to maintain that artifact so you have the one piece of gravity that keeps you in check when things go crazy.
And by artifact, I think what we're talking about here is some form of design documentation, project documentation that can be kind of a common point of reference for everybody who's on the team, on the project, or even just yourself, right? Be able to understand and go back to that and reflect upon it. Over the course of time that we've been in games, the kind of thinking about design docs and documentation has changed pretty radically, right? If we go back to the 90s when we started, we would, the teams would write like tomes, like, 300-400 pages of documentation that would be there for it. And now, I think over the last couple of decades, we've really transitioned that to thinking about how to keep it as small as possible. And so that people are actually going to read it because, 300-400 page, no one actually ever reads it.
Yeah. That's for like the record books. That's what you refer to when you're old and you want to have something to read.
At Microsoft, I tried to boil that down into 3 documents I wanted people to do before we started on a game, which I called the essence, the core, and the overview. The most difficult of those was the essence, right? Like a 50-word statement that tried to sum up the entire game. And that's really hard to do, right? But it's super important because if you can't capture the core of what you're trying to do in a very few words, it's very hard to express it to others, especially when you're out trying to market that game days or years later, being able to have that crisp communication of it. And I think your statement earlier about being deliberate about a change, right? Because what happens is we write these things down and then we get into development. And by nature, you said it's a journey. It's true, right? The thing starts to shift. And inadvertently, all of a sudden, you find you're making something very different. And that's usually problematic, right? It's really important to stop and come back and say, are we explicitly making a change? Are we? And if so, then change our documentation, change our pillars to reflect that. If not, then maybe we were just wandering by accident and we need to come back to those pillars. When you think about that, is there any particular favorite form of how to express that artifact that you think works better than others?
As far as technology, I either like to use some sort of wiki that can be edited by multiple people and you can set permissions on, or just as simple as a Google Doc is fine as well. Anything that has history so you can see changes. I remember one of the types of documentation that we had at Microsoft and a couple of other places that I stopped at, is kind of the why document, which was like you start off with kind of the one pager, which is in essence what you were referring to, having the different sizes and different scope of what you're trying to describe. A lot of that was also used for funding or making sure that you were getting budget to do what you needed to do. If you're doing it on your own, I think it's still important for any conversations that you have with partners or other people that you come across while you're creating. So I do like to have the one pager and then a 5-pager, which gives a little bit more details. Once you decide what you're making, then you can kind of articulate and say, okay, well, here is what I see as far as the work that needs to happen in sequence in order to deliver against that one pager. And so that's kind of a very rudimentary, it's not a full-blown development plan, but it's a development plan summary, which people can rally around depending upon how many people you have who are trying to contribute to the effort.
That aligns pretty well with the way that I've approached it, with that essence statement, which was like literally 50 words, and then a one pager. And my rule for the one pager is there shouldn't be any features on the one pager. The one pager is about the goals. What should the features add up to? Like, what are the goals of the game that you're trying to make, from immersion, from storytelling, from mechanics? What is the top level goals? And then that 5-pager you mentioned for me is where you then break those goals down and start to talk about what are the most important features that are going to accomplish those goals. Yeah. And then from that, you can do that high level scheduling or breakout of what you think is going to be the most important. And then in terms of thinking about order of development, at least my experience always is you go through all those features and those goals and you figure out which is the hardest to do. And whatever one is the hardest to do, the most risky, you do it first. Because if the entire design is based upon that being successful, if it isn't successful, then you know to abandon the rest of the design, or that you need to go back and dramatically change it. By nature, we tend to move towards the things that we know for sure and try to get those done first. But I think from a development standpoint, you got to reverse that and try to take on the things that are the riskiest, the hardest first. At least that's my experience. I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Exactly. The other thing is as far as the feature set goes, is I like to basically kind of prioritize the feature set as well. So every game kind of boils down to one, if not a handful of core activities that the user is going to repeat over and over again, right? It's basically what I call the toy. Hopefully we get you there to do it thousands of times over and over. What makes that fun? What makes that rewarding of a mechanic? So prioritizing and basically saying, these are the most important things to this game. These other features can actually fall off as long as I nail these. And that kind of also goes into that calculus of what do I front load in the schedule. I want to give as much effort and time to the repeatable activities than some of the side features that are maybe more window dressing. They could still be very important to the overall experience, but they're not the main thing that the users are going to engage with from a usability perspective. I score all of those. And then, as you mentioned, same thing, risk analysis of what's the biggest risk to this project. The producer side is risk mitigation, dependency chain tracking, deliverables, and any blockages. What's going to block me from progressing?
And that risk is not necessarily engineering risk, right? A lot of it could be design risk. We're betting that we've got this new combat mechanic, or we've got a really cool character interaction mechanic, and everything flows from that. So if that's the piece you need to build first, to prototype it first, and make sure that the fun is actually where you thought it was going to be, and then give yourself some room to go find the fun, because often that can be a little bit of a journey. In producers' terms, good to time box things. We gave ourselves 2 weeks to make the prototype, and then we're giving ourselves 2 months to find the fun. And if we haven't found the fun within 2 months, then maybe we just need to call it quits on this and try a radically different direction, which is a nice segue into another thing that you raised in our pre-podcast discussion, which was scope. What's your thoughts on scope?
Scope is a very interesting subject because people are passionate about what they want to deliver and visions that they have. And over the years, I've worked with a lot of different visionaries who have had, at times, challenges with their scope. I'm not speaking to anybody.
Present company not accepted.
To anybody who's on this call. One of the things that is very helpful is in making sure that you think of a project as kind of layers. And this is why I was talking about spending enough time and making sure you have enough time for for that very core piece of what you're trying to deliver, because the other layers that go on top of it that make it so unique and make it so special and beautiful, that's awesome. But you have to be able to basically peel off some of those layers and be okay with letting some things go. The way software used to be delivered is you would create depending upon what platform you were delivering. If you're delivering on for Nintendo, you were delivering your cartridge, and there was no such thing as a patch. So whatever you put in the box is what you put in the box, and that was it. Nowadays, fortunately, we have the ability to update and to change things such that you can reduce your scope and say, we're going to deliver this primary piece first. And then iteratively, if we have time and if we have budget, we can continue to deliver along for the product, so that eventually you can release your full vision. Now, you can go either way. There's the golden triangle. There's time, there's scope, there's manpower. If a person is very passionate and they don't care if their project takes 10 years to deliver, which is a little crazy because technology changes so fast, you can take as long as you want and have your scope very large. If you have a timed goal, like I really want to deliver something by the end of this year, scope becomes highly important, and you need to be ready to jettison some things that are less important to the core.
Very well phrased. The other thing that we're really looking at with one of the tools we really built into Adventure Forge is kind of episodic release. And I think this is maybe more true in narrative games than others, but I think we're seeing it in other games, like the whole concept of Steam introducing early access, which was the idea of being able to bring in players before a game is fully finished, before it's fully polished, get their feedback, get their enthusiasm, and take that into account as you're finishing the game. And I think we're trying to push that even a little further, more into kind of the realm of what you see in fan fiction, where people don't wait to finish their novel before putting it out there to the fan fiction community, right? They're putting it out chapter at a time, or even sometimes even sub-chapter at a time, to get feedback and, importantly, get emotional encouragement.
Yes.
Because creating is hard, and especially, you and I have been on these long treks where it can take 3, 4, 5 years to make a game, and you're in your own little bunker and you're getting no feedback, and it's really hard to keep your enthusiasm up, to keep your focus up in those kind of periods. So I think hopefully tools like ours and others allow you to engage your users, your players earlier in the process, and hoping that helps propel us further as we get things.
This episode of The Game Mechanics was brought to you by Adventure Forge, an all-in-one toolkit for crafting story-rich games for the PC and Mac. Create branching narratives, asymmetric RPGs, puzzle games, and much more. No coding required, no syntax, just smart logic written in plain English. You don't need permission, you don't need credentials, you just need a story, a spark, a reason. Build the game only you can make.
Over the years, the advent of user testing and usability testing, we didn't bring people in early on in my gaming career to play. We used our playtesters, our internal playtesters, and we had, of course, friends and family and things like that. But seeing the sophistication now of, for big AAA games, of a whole division that worked on getting feedback. Now, the great thing, like with Adventure Forge, right, is you can actually kind of manage that and do that yourself, right? And give access to people being able to give you early feedback, and getting that feedback and organizing that feedback and then reacting to that feedback against your plan can really help you along.
Somewhat a good connection into talking about team roles and collaborating with each other. Obviously, in kind of passion and UGC experiences, those can be much more fluid than they are in a professional setting where you were hired for kind of a specific job. But any guidance when you're thinking about Game Jam or UGC, people collaborating out of passion for a project, and how to deal with roles and collaborations and responsibilities?
It's kind of funny because I applied a lot of the same concepts to doing escape rooms. When you attack an escape room, you want to have various areas or roles of ownership. So you actually do normally, or at least when I do them, we elect someone as basically the producer or the project manager. And their role is to keep an eye on time and to make sure that nobody's rat holing in anything. And then you have your prop master, the people that are more focused on the physical items that are in the room that you need to collect and put together, and then problem solvers. From a team perspective, and it totally depends on the size, right? Like you're going to have domain experts. Depending upon the size of your team, you will have overlap. But knowing what your role is and kind of defining those of like, hey, here's the decision maker for ABC, here's the decision maker for this, and understanding how those people interconnect. And that's kind of that dependency chain as well. In order for an artist to know what they need to create, they need to understand the design. They also need to understand the constraints that they have on their art, like how many polygons, how many vertices, how many, all of the things that go into constraining their creative process. Because constraint is actually good.
I was going to say, yeah, that's not a negative term.
No, it is a very positive term, because the last thing that you want to do is hand off to creatives without enough constraint. And then they go spend their very valuable time creating things. And then they come back to you and very proud of like, look at this awesome thing that I've created. And you're like, yeah, we can never render that. And then they go, wah, wah, and they're deflated. And then there's contention, right? Because then there's like, well, you never told me I had to, be under, 100,000 polygons.
Those are excellent points in terms of when you're collaborating with others, right? Being able to establish the constraints, like, what is our budget, whether it's monetary, whether it's time, whether it's performance, right? There's budgets in all of these categories, and understanding those when you're creating the work is really important, and allocating it. I also think it's really important, even among friends who are working on something, to establish roles and responsibilities. It's going to be a collaborative thing. We're all going to be accommodating each other's work, and that's really positive. We want that. We want that wonderful social interaction. But you also don't want to get into decision paralysis where everybody just has an opinion and you can't move forward. So if you start in the beginning by saying, all right, you're going to be the art director, you're going to be the design director, you're going to be the head of music, and you're going to do logic implementation or whatever it might be. And then when we're discussing it, and it's like we all put in comments, but eventually someone needs to make a decision, and you want to have to decide who's going to be the decision maker on aspects of the project ahead of time, so that you are capable to keep moving forward. In a more structured professional setting, right, those things are established by roles and pay tiers and things like that. But in a UGC group of friends, you have to be a little bit more explicit. I want to go from there to talk about the term Agile. I'm sure a lot of people will have heard that term and say, oh, it's the modern thing. But what is it? And does it apply to these small game projects?
Agile basically just means short-term iterative planning, and sometimes it can go into the methodology that you use for your development process. So there's Scrum, there's Kanban, there's all sorts of Agile styles. I have yet to work at a shop that was hyper religious about every element of a particular Agile style. So normally I've worked in things that I just call like kind of Scrum-fall. So it's short bursts of deliverables, identifying what the team can deliver against a certain timeline. You'll have a longer timeline. You have to have goalposts for a longer project, right? So if you're working on something that is really going to take at least a year to develop, well, you don't know exactly what you're delivering in month 6, or exactly how it's going to look to get there, but you have to set up some goalposts, right? Like, by this time we want to be here, by this time we want to be here. And then as you get closer to real time, you want to be as specific as you can and as intentional as you can about the work that you're delivering and what your goals are for that near term. And defining that, documenting that, I have found it very important for people to actually write down. And you don't have to write these novels of tickets, or so I like to use a system. And the system can be as small as using a Google Sheets, Trello cards. I mean, you don't have to use like Jira or any paid service. But yeah, something that lets people see the work. So you're defining the work. I use the word artifact all the time. You're defining it in an artifact that people can actually put in front of their face on their monitor and see what people are doing and what the team is doing. And then you want that work to go through a funnel. Here's what we need to do. Here's what we're actively doing. Here's what we've done, but needs some review to make sure that we call this done, and then put it over into the done pile. You can look at the journey and see things going through the pile, and that's the definition of work. There might be another artifact that you would have, which is a higher level, zoom out shot of here's the intention on what we're trying to build, and here are the different groupings of times, and here's where we are on that timeline. The other drilled in piece is really for the team to make sure that you're accomplishing the work. This piece up top is where are we on our journey? And it's basically a Gantt chart. You can build that in, like I said, Google Sheets. You can
or just like a Google drawing to help flex it out. Certainly done that. If I contrast what we used to call waterfall structure versus an agile, right? A waterfall, right, is you start up at the top and you've got the first pool. And so your first features are up there and you spend time on them, and then the waterfalls to the next one, and then next one. What happens, of course, is you end up spending more time up here and less water keeps trickling down until later in the project, you've got dry pools because there's just no water left to flow to them. You've got no time or budget left to get to them. And so inadvertently, you've chosen which features get done by order of execution. And if that order of execution wasn't right, then you're completely messed, right? And to me, the advent of Agile was to think about it, just say, no, you don't have that flexibility. You're going to give yourself X amount of time for this first bucket of features. And if they don't get done, then you need to cut stuff from not only that bucket, but all subsequent buckets so that you're not getting this constant tsunami of unfinished things that flows through the project. It's a very difficult way of thinking, because you're constantly killing your babies, constantly killing off things you really cared about. But it does, I think, give you a better chance of trying to arrive at the most important features within a reasonable expectation of your time and budget.
That's right.
There is a difference between theory and practice. I really understand the theory. I'm very bad at the practice.
The practice is hard, right? I mean, the practice is also about how much the team believes in that process and can actually work well in that process. There are some people that are very comfortable with that, and there are some people that are not very comfortable and like to work more in isolation. Agile is very much about team accountability and holding each other accountable, and not in a negative way, and actually a positive way. It's a reinforcement of, hey, we are here. Let's communicate with one another so that we know the problems that we're running into, so that we might help each other through some of those problems. And that becomes difficult at sometimes when you have certain people that are domain experts that nobody else has knowledge of, but at least having someone to soundboard off of with your Agile team, if you have a daily stand-up or some sort of method of check-in where your team is communicating with one another. We are human. We are all very social animals for the most part. We do like our privacy, but feeling supported and feeling communal is an important aspect of Agile.
I want to touch on one thing before we go to probably our final subject, which is you were talking about social animals. And I think that's very, very true. But we're also very different in how much socialization we need and how we communicate. And when you're working with team members, really understanding how people process information, how they need to respond to it. Like you may find that some team members, you need to send them an email ahead of time that lays out the discussion so that they're mentally prepared for it, because they're not built to quickly jump to a subject. And so they need more prep. Others, you might need to express it, have a conversation, but not expect an answer because they need time to process, right? And then respond. So I do think, yeah, we are indeed social animals, but how we socially engage, how we discuss and we need to have flexibility and understand each other well enough to be able to get that to be constructive, because it can be inadvertently very stressful. One conversation style can be super stressful to another person, not by intention. All right. Well, for our last subject, I want to go back to the beginning of your career, which is quality assurance and playtesting. And let's talk about the role of that, even in the context here of smaller user-generated content, fans and friends building stuff. How does QA and playtesting get integrated and done in a way that helps build a better product, better game?
There are multiple layers to that, right? There's quality. The one thing that I want to make sure that I state is quality is not the responsibility of just your testers. Quality is the responsibility of the entire team. Ultimately, the product owner has the most responsibility for the quality of the product that they're delivering. Now, let's talk about practical application of testing. So there are multiple methodologies to testing, right? There's programmatic testing, getting feedback very early and partnering with people to give you their assessment. Basically having a first playable, right? First, you're going to have your developers are going to be developing the features. They're going to experience them first with the designers, with the artists. There are methods that you can do for each feature, right? There's what are kind of called vertical slices. So when you have your first experiential piece that you can put in front of others, there is kind of two categories. There's what I would call user testing, which is more perception and like, what is your emotional feel? How do you understand the inputs and the activity? Do you understand what you're seeing? Do you understand what you're experiencing? Do you understand the sequence of what you're supposed to be doing inside of the game and the flow? And then there's proper testing, and then the testing is pattern recognition, looking for ways that you can cause the application or the design to break. Now, you can also do paper testing. So if you have a design or a concept, you can actually have others on the team read through that and try and poke holes if there's, depending upon how deep the documentation is or how you are trying to describe the design.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because I think especially in narrative games, which often have kind of more turn-based mechanics associated with them, whether it's interacting with characters or it's actually tactical combat, we've tried to build a system that allows you to build those very quickly for video games, but you can build it even quicker with dice and paper on the table and get your friends around the table and try out your core mechanics there and iterate them very quickly. So I'm glad you brought that up.
One of the other concepts of quality assurance is it's most efficient the closest that you can get to giving feedback to when something is first created. Because if you think about a design and art goes into it and programming, and then you have a whole system and you spend hundreds of hours developing something and then you start testing it, if you find something wrong with some of the fundamentals, you now have to go and rewind back to maybe where that core fundamental thing was broken. And that might cause a chain reaction that causes you to have to redo some art, redo some content, throw away things. And so that's both wasteful as far as time.
Absolutely true. And it's in terms of like mistakes you keep making in your life. This is one I keep making. It's part of is born by like, oh, I can't show it to people yet because it isn't good enough. I need this, and it needs this piece. It needs this to be before I could really get a good reaction. And normally, what that is, and again, I'm very guilty of this, is you're just afraid. You're afraid of putting it out there, and so you keep coming up with more and more things that have to be there before you're ready to show it. But your core mechanic, right? You got to get it that. You can't be afraid of that. It can't be like the art style isn't going to save your core mechanic, right? A brilliant UI can help, but it's a brilliant UI on top of a mechanic that's not fun. It's gilding the lily still. So I agree. It's very hard to do. And as I said, it's a constant strive for improvement on my own sake on this, to get it out there early and test as early as you can. The other thing I think is important is obviously, you're testing because you need to listen. You need to be able to get that feedback, but you also need to be able to kind of try to look at what's underneath the feedback. So your testers may come back and say, oh, it's way too hard. And they then come up with how they think it should be fixed, right? Well, the real thing you want to pull away is they didn't have fun because they thought it was too hard. The proposals for how to fix it may not be very valuable, right? Because they don't understand all the systems underneath that generated it to be too hard. So you need to be able to then break those down and figure out, why did they arrive at that emotional response, right? And again, not an easy thing to do, but the more you do it with people, the better insights you'll start to get.
Exactly. Yep. Yeah. And the other thing about testing that it can be touchy for the creators is that it's real feedback against what they've created. And you have to be okay and be able to live with, failure is actually a good thing. Right. And that's in small batches, right? When you're like, you don't want to fail your entire project, but the faster that you fail, it's kind of that same concept of the faster you get feedback, the feedback loop, the speed of that is has so much benefit. Like, you really want to fail as fast as possible because it gets you to solutioning. So like if I create this concept for this game, I'm like, man, this game is going to make millions of dollars and it's an incredible, nobody's ever done this before. And I put it in front of people as far as concept, right? Even just a concept. And they're like, oh, that's dumb, or that's not going to be fun because of XYZ, that things that I've never thought of, or, oh, this other game did this and it's already been done. All of those things are feedback, right? We as individuals have our view and the information that we have in our brain. All of the additional information and viewpoints and things that you get from expanding that and getting feedback from other sources is nothing but helpful to your endeavor and what you're doing. For me, I even like to change out as you move along. I like to change out people that I get feedback from. I'm not like your proper testers, you're going to keep those, but more usability and more people to come in because they'll have fresh perspectives. You'll be able to then look at your early feedback that you got from some other people and the new feedback and say, oh, are we actually progressing? Did we solve some of the problems that we had earlier?
Each person can only have first user experience once.
Exactly. That's right.
And that's hard because you kind of need to keep finding additional pools. Well, thank you so much for this. If you had one last bit of advice to people starting their game journey, starting to create their games, what would come top of mind?
Top of mind, be patient, but be driven and passionate. Don't let no or failure dissuade you. If you are really passionate about creating something, stick with it. There will be failures. There will be setbacks. Learn from those setbacks, document those setbacks, sit with that data and figure out how you interpret that for improvement, right? Life is, you see this really old gray long beard. I learn at work exponentially every day. You never get to the end.
That's so true.
So you will always learn, and it's a great journey, and you should just embrace that. And I wish you great fortune and luck in creating your next adventure.
I love all of that. The only thing I would add to it is think small.
Yes.
Think about the smallest game. Think about the smallest feature. Think about the smallest amount of content you can make to make your game. And it's so hard because we all have such all expansive things. But if you can, the smaller you think, the more likely you are to finish, and the more likely. And if you finish, then you'll learn, and you'll go to your next one. Evan, just pearls of wisdom. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And hopefully we'll get a chance to talk again, bring you back in for more advice and help. Thanks so much.
That was great, Jordan.